Вітаю! Сьогодні, як завжди, з вами «Вечірній тепловізор», в студії Олександр, Данилюк, і ми будемо говорити про новий документальний фільм «Переломний момент. Війна за демократію в Україні», який, власне, був презентований днями в Києві. В нашій студії сьогодні режисер фільму Марк Джонатан Харріс та продюсер фільму Пітер Борисов. Вітаю вас! Hello.
Hello.
So actually, the most confusing, at least for me, was the beginning of your work in Ukraine, because as I can see, you started before the revolution. So probably you had some very strong insights, and that's why you started in 2013.
Yes, I came here first to Ukraine in 2007. That was my introduction to your country. I was here to make a film about Viktor Kravchenko, the famous communist dissident who wrote I Chose Freedom. And I learned about your country and I learned about your history. And you know, once you go to a country, once you meet people and develop attachment, then you start to care about the country.
So it was occasionally, actually, you just started some other movie?
Yes, I started this other project, and that's when I met, for the first time, Olis Sanyan, the co-director of this film, Breaking Point.
Breaking Point.
So we developed a relationship, and I met people in this country, and began to be concerned about what was happening in Ukraine. And Olis then and Peter approached me to help to tell the Ukrainian story to the West. They wanted an American filmmaker to help translate these events to an audience who knew very little about Ukraine and probably cared less than that. So they wanted a fresh eye, and they wanted someone who could speak to a Western audience. So that was the foundation of our collaboration.
Unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to see the movie yet, so I'm looking forward to have this chance. But could you explain for our audience your main point? So actually, what is your general idea? What did you try to explain to the Western audience?
We were trying to tell the story of the revolution and the war through the eyes of people whose lives had been transformed by these momentous events. So we tried to find a representative sample of characters who began on the Maidan and then continued to fight in the war in the East. So that was one goal. The second goal was to try to provide some historical and political perspective on Ukraine so that people in the West could understand how long this struggle for independence has been going on, and finally to see how that struggle of independence was relevant to their lives. So when we started out, we thought, okay, this is about the future of democracy in Ukraine. It's also about the future of democracy in Europe. And now, given the events in the United States, it's very relevant to the future of democracy in America. And a third goal of the film was to talk about this was a war not just of tanks, but also of words and propaganda, and to try to expose the extent of Russian disinformation and Russian propaganda. So I think those were our three main goals. And in any film, you make a movie, you tell the story through the characters and through the lives of the people. If we can identify with the people in the film and we can understand their goals and we can have empathy for them, then we can understand what they're fighting for.
And as I understand, you explaining this idea through personal stories of 6 heroes. Could you tell us a little bit about them?
We had a range of characters. So one of our characters is someone who's a theater director, a children's theater director. So that's not a stereotypical figure who then becomes involved in Maidan and goes to war. We also had a rabbi because we felt it was important to counter the North American stereotype that Ukrainians are all anti-Semitic.
Yeah, and Nazi.
Exactly. So that was important. Somebody who became a patriot and cemented his identity as a Ukrainian through his involvement in the Maidan and in the war. We also found someone, Tatiana Chernobyl, who was a very well-known investigative reporter, who then became a member of parliament. Mustafa Naim, whose Facebook page sort of launched the Maidan. A doctor who then became involved in the military. So we had different perspectives from a cast of characters who were not the usual stereotypes of people that you would imagine. We also had a husband and a wife, the Yanchenkos, and the wife started to be a lawyer, became a medic, and then became part of the army. So we were chronicling their journeys and the transformation that took place. One of the ideas we wanted to, I think, express was that, and that these are ideas that have always interested me, is how people can sacrifice their own personal lives, willing to take risk for a larger idea of liberty and freedom.
It's nice. And actually, Peter, how did you join this project? Because as I understand, without your participation, it was a little bit more difficult, at least, to organize this team.
Without money, it's impossible to make a film.
Well, Ola Sanyan and I go back many years. We met in 2003 when he showed his first film, Mamai, at the Academy. As an Oscar contender in Los Angeles. And we became good friends and have been in contact ever since. It was Olis who got me involved in coming to Ukraine for the Orange Revolution, the first Maidan. And I was a posterehach, election observer at that election. So my contact with Ukraine has been pretty constant. And I was here when the Maidan started, this Maidan. Right across the street from here, and I was in the Maidan when the kids showed up, and it was fascinating to hear how they were, the mood was very young, they were excited, they were talking about Shakespeare and Kant and philosophy and democracy and Jefferson, something that I really never thought I would hear. Kids hanging out, college kids hanging out in Ukraine talking about Jefferson and democracy. So I was fascinated by it. And then when they were attacked and beaten that night, I heard it. I was in a hotel just across the street from there. So I became very interested and very involved and was here through most of these events. And of course was in at least once or twice a day contact with the people in Maidan, with Olis. And we were having a conversation at a certain point about how because a lot of the reporters from BBC and CNN and other networks stayed at the same hotel, and they'd be in the lobby with their body armor, and they would have a translator who came in with them from Russia, a Russian hired translator, not a Ukrainian translator. And the whole image of what they were reporting, and I could hear them taping the recording, broadcasting live from the lobby in the hotel. They were telling the story through basically Moscow-based eyes, because that's how the networks work. They had a field office in Moscow. They didn't have any offices in Kiev, and they wanted to know something about Ukraine. They talked to the Russian correspondent. So the news, they were really broadcasting more propaganda, Russian propaganda, than the actual news. They weren't really getting in to the depth of the story and understanding what was happening, especially when the invasion came. They really believed that these were unhappy Ukrainians.
Civil War, yeah.
Yeah, they didn't understand that they were, was it Anne Applebaum? Was it Maskirovka? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, she called it Maskirovka, what was going on. So we were talking about how to tell the real story to the world. And it was well understood that there was tons of material out there, but how do we get the story out? And we came to the conclusion that we needed an English voice and a grand master of that English voice. So I approached Mark to direct it because he's the best documentary filmmaker in the United States. He's got 3 Academy Awards to show for it, and nobody else in the business has 3 Academy Awards, and he has a huge sensibility to the human condition. Mark has been a human rights activist probably since his teenage years, if not before. Strongly committed to the civil rights issues in the United States, to environmental issues, to all of the issues that the young generation worldwide is committed to. So I thought he was the perfect voice to person to work to do this, yeah. How to deliver that message of what was going on in Ukraine to an English-speaking world, and the world outside is English-speaking, not Russian or Ukrainian. So
this was a real collaboration between Oles Sanyan and the American team. I worked with my co-writer Paul Wolanski. Was born in America, but his parents are Ukrainian. Ukrainian was his first language. He has lifelong connections to these issues. His grandfather was killed by Stalin. He was an intellectual killed by Stalin in the 30s. And we worked. I mean, we couldn't have made this film just from the United States. It's Oles who did most of the interviews with the main subjects of our film. And in fact, he did all the interviews with the main subjects. We provided some historical and political perspective. We interviewed Chrystia Freeland, who is now the foreign minister of Canada. She wasn't then. Timothy Snyder, the historian, and Applebaum, to try to provide that kind of perspective. But Oles shot all the material here in Ukraine, along with multiple camera people, some anonymous, who went to the front, who captured the Maidan. It was our job to sift through these hundreds of hours of footage and try to find a way to compress these events without distorting them. So there was a constant dialogue. No, this didn't happen this way. You're taking liberties here. But we're trying to make this point. How do we do this? So that kind of constant dialogue. Oles came from Kyiv, several times to Los Angeles. Today in the world of internet, you can cut something in Los Angeles. You can send it to Kyiv that night. Next morning, you get comments. Our assistant editor was Chinese, so connected to these events because of growing up in a communist system, and because of Tiananmen Square, because of what happened to her parents during the Cultural Revolution. So it was an international effort to try to understand these events and relate them to people who might not have been aware or have cared about what was going on here.
Yeah, we were also very lucky that Mark chose to bring in Jason Rosenfield to edit, who's a very, very brilliant, very patient, great artist, and the editing of the film is just, I think, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, actually, you were engaged in at least observing of the Ukrainian situation since the very beginning, and it's pretty clear that you know, for at least most of the Ukrainian population, the perspective has changed towards a lot of issues. Not probably toward values, yeah, but probably towards some players, yeah, during this period. So I think that we have a lot of national heroes who are not national heroes anymore, and some of them probably were inspired by Russian side from the very beginning, where, like, you know, infiltrators, penetrators. So I don't think that it's possible to explain to the Western audience, because it's too complicated even to Ukrainian society. But at the same time, what do you think about this type of maskirovka? Yeah, this type of military deception.
You know,
and actually today in the U.S., it's clear that your society were penetrated by the same things as well.
You know, I think in our film, the historian Timothy Snyder says something to the effect that it's easier to make a revolution than what comes afterwards.
Yeah, good governance is a much bigger challenge. Yeah, it's true.
Yes, the revolution is the easy part, to throw out the old government. So it's clear, and that Ukraine is, you know, facing really, they need to restructure the government. You know, there's a long history of corrupt government here, but it's very difficult. At the same time, you're waging a war. So it's a battle on two fronts. And, you know, you're also battling, you know, this is a war, this was a war of tanks as well as words and disinformation. And this is the part of the film that has strikes a chord in American audiences today, because they're looking at Russian disinformation and they're seeing that our new president and his team are using the same techniques. And, you know, disinformation is not just to provide alternative facts, but it's to confuse. And you throw up all these series of lies, then it becomes difficult to say which lie is the one that you have to attack. And then it's like a swarm of bees. You ward off several, but some get through. So it's very, very difficult. And, you know, when we show the film now, and the film in the last, since the election, you know, the film has really struck a chord in audiences in the United States, because they say, see, wait a minute, what's going on in Ukraine is not so different than what's going on in the United States now, especially in terms of fake news, alternative facts, and a president who seems incapable of distinguishing between truth and fiction.
Peter, you had actually a lot of insights, and still have a lot of insights about Ukrainian political life, even behind the scenes. So what is your attitude toward the current situation? So what do you think about real increase or decrease of Russian influence in Ukraine, and how it was possible to...
I think what's important now is the much, much greater awareness of Russian influence across the entire spectrum of the Ukrainian population. And if you're going to solve a problem, you first have to identify the problem. I think the Ukrainian nation as a whole, and you've done your part of that as well, now focuses on, and is beginning, and has understood the extent of Russian influence and control of a vast spectrum of Ukrainian political life. And they are taking their steps, the people of Ukraine are taking their steps to deal with it. And I'm very confident, probably for the first time in years, I'm very confident that even though the situation is difficult, they will manage to deal with it.
So you're optimistic?
I am, even though it looks pretty nasty on the landscape, they're dealing with it. They have finally come to the reality check of the awareness of what is going on, and now we have to deal with it. And if they have to fight for it, they've shown that they're ready, willing, and able to fight for it, and fight very bravely and very effectively. So I'm optimistic on the future of Ukraine. Absolutely.
You know, in our film, the former Prime Minister Yatsenuk says, you know, talks about American democracy, and you know, takes, he said, not just years or decades, it takes hundreds of years to develop these institutions. Now in the United States, we're testing the resilience of these institutions. So these are institutions that you're just beginning to build here. I mean, Ukraine has been independent, what, since 1991? You know,
so probably since 2014.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
the real independence. Yes, yes.
Or at least, yeah, it was the first serious attempt, to build this independence.
Or maybe
it's not just about democracy.
So,
or maybe since 2018.
So I mean,
we will see. Yeah,
you're here. I mean, I think you have probably a much greater sense of what needs to be done than we do. In our film, we didn't dare to try to prescribe what the future should be for democracy in Ukraine. We wanted to just represent, you know, what the struggle was. It would have been incredibly presumptuous of us to suggest how to solve these problems. And as Peter said, we in some ways just try to identify and acknowledge that this is just the beginning.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that it's just the beginning. But at the same time, we, I think, need to explain some additional ideas or goals of your movie, because you said that you used several characters to counter Russian propaganda during Maidan, and Peter said that he was an observer of actually Russian influence even on the Western media through translators and and this headquarters in Moscow. So actually, if we are talking about Russian narratives during revolution and during the war, what can you say about these narratives? I mean that sometimes for us in Ukraine it looks like actually ridiculous that anybody could believe in this story that Ukrainians are Nazi. And to be honest, Ukrainian parliament has less Nazi than most of the European parliaments, including, you know, France and Germany. And even far-right politicians, because Nazi is too strong word to use. So at the same time, how do you think this Russian narratives where are successful for Western audience? How many people believe?
You know, people are often uninformed, and Russia is very, very good at appealing to people's prejudices, so that it goes to, you know, it speaks with so many different voices. But when it speaks to the right in Europe or America, it says this is a war that's started by the CIA and Jews. And then when it speaks to the left,
this Ukrainian war,
right, the revolution,
Jews and CIA.
Yes, right.
So they organized the Russian invasion and annexation of Crimea.
They're talking about, yes,
they're very smart.
And then when, you know, they go to the left, they say, look, it's the right sector. It's all, you know, it's all Nazis. So they're saying different things to different audiences.
A few dozens of activists from one side,
right,
and Russian army from another side.
So it's confirming people's prejudices. Or, you know, it's like you're validating what people tend to believe, and they're very good at that. So, and if people are not well informed, and if they don't pay attention, and the attention span in America is very short, as it is in a lot of places. So if it, you know, on the internet, I've done some work on the internet, producing material, and they say if it's over 3 minutes, people are going to turn it off. You know, you have to. So because of that, because of the short attention span, and because this is a complex history, people don't. I think propaganda can be successful. And how many people believe it's just impossible to quantify that.
Yeah, but actually, Peter, I have a question to you. Actually, it's my own opinion, but you probably will share my view on the situation that today, because of the diversity of different sources of information, of thousands of different medias, so probably Hollywood is the one of the most influential tools of influence, yeah, and that's why. Actually, how many people in Hollywood really believed in this Russian narrative about Ukrainian Nazi, about Ukrainian civil war?
I don't think that there's a significant difference in how Hollywood perceived these events compared to, for example, the general public. There are the percentage of ignorant people in Hollywood, ignorant not in the sense of being dumb, but ignorant in the sense of simply not having facts, not having the basic knowledge, as anywhere else in the world. We were very fortunate to have gotten one of the great experts on disinformation and propaganda, Paul Goebel, to comment on the MH17 shoot down, and he actually walks through certain events and says, well, and Timothy Snyder commented, you throw so much information out there that instead of focusing on an evil act, it becomes just a media event. I think those were his words. The stories that they tell just confuse and confound. And of course, the question that it leads us to is why, and it's a question that bothers me to this moment, why a nation like Holland, that suffers the greatest losses, has still not taken a meaningful act, a meaningful position, in terms of Russia. You know, Bellingcat proved today, they identified the individual officer who was responsible for that rocket being fired and missile being fired and shooting down the plane. They have his name. They know exactly who he is, where he came from. They've traced the movement second by second. The evidence is irrefutable, and Bellingcat is an independent, I think they're Swedish-based agency. And the Dutch are not responding. Not only are they not responding, but they blocked the vote for Ukraine into the European Union. And it boils down to the ugly saying, follow the money. So as long as Putin can use his money, and Holland has a lot of trade, gas and oil and other business with Russia.
Yes, logistics to Europe.
Yeah, as long as Putin can use his cash to buy influence, he can peddle a credible framework for any lie he wants to.
Yeah.
And as another person said in the film, that today the Russians are the best liars in the world.
Yeah, and they have a lot of supporters in the Western society.
Well, we even have certain scenes in the film where Putin is asked, are there Russian soldiers in Crimea? And he says, no, yet. And then you see these soldiers from eastern Siberia who are completely Asian.
Guys, yeah.
And the guys, they ask him, are you Ukrainian?
Russian,
No, they ask him, are you Ukrainian? He says, hell no, I'm Russian. And so it's just the blatancy of the lie, but it doesn't have any impact. Doesn't go anywhere because it's dispersed, it's watered down, it becomes a media event, it becomes a debate, which is the real news, which is a fake news. And it really, at the end of the day, boils down to dollars. There was a report recently from the former head of the Voice of America program, which is now broadcasting in Russian into Russia. And he said that their operating budget for the entire year is $750 million. The operating budget for RT is $7.5 billion.
Yeah.
10 to 1.
But it's not just about money, you know. It's
Well, the root of it is
about rules as well and understanding. The problem is that
but
actually
the more you
Cold
repeat
War,
the lie,
hasn't been over. This is the problem, yeah.
Well,
at least for one side.
Yeah, well, you're doing, providing a different narrative here and trying to get it to people who don't have access to that kind of information. And, that's in our small way, we're trying to do the same thing with this film, is to get this information to people who don't have access to it, because in the United States, during the Maidan, there was interest in this issue, but it was quickly eclipsed by ISIS, by the war in Syria. Events move on. So if people didn't care before, it's hard to get them to care now. And that's why, Ukraine has suddenly come back into the news because of our president's ties or connections to Russia, which are yet unclear, but what we do know is that more is going to come out about this, that a lot has not been revealed, but that certainly we've had, in less than a month, we've already had the resignation of General Flynn, the head of the National Security Council, because of his ties to Russia. And can we expect that he's the only one that has ties to Russia, and that President Trump really didn't have any awareness of this? It's hard to believe.
Yeah, it's hard to believe, especially because of the, some suspicious sources of financial support during the elections. But nonetheless, I think that probably it's my own suggestion that probably Russians are not single masters of military deception. So who knows? I know some military guys who are familiar with Mr. Flynn, General Flynn, in the past, so it's hard to believe that he could be like 100% Russian agent. Russians are very good in that, but probably not, so good.
Right. There's a lot that we don't know that I think is going to come out in the next several months.
I think Paul Goldwyn made a very insightful comment in the film when he said that the Russians understand Western media better than the West understands Western media. And they manipulate it very effectively and very cleverly.
Yeah, because, for authoritarian countries, it's much easier to conduct such operations because they don't have any restrictions, checks and balances. They have all this dirty money. There is no difference between money of government and their private money. So yeah, they have, technically they're sort of international criminal group, and that's the main challenge for the rest of the world, to realize that it's not like state, yeah, in the general understanding. It's more like ISIS or something even worse. Okay, so actually we have 4 minutes, and probably you would like to tell our audience something about your plans. Are you going to make something about Ukraine, another movie? Or?
I have no immediate plans to make another movie about Ukraine right now. Our goal, the film is going to be shown here on television. We're working to try to get it distributed on television in the United States. It's available for universities and educational institutions right now. And eventually we hope it will go on one of the, video on demand platforms or something like Amazon or Hulu, and that will be available to individuals. We'd like, our goal is to try to get it to as many people as possible, both in North America and Europe. And we're grateful it's going to be on television here. It's 3 years, almost to the date, of in the end, February 20th, I think it's going to be on. We've been gratified by the response because people say that in seeing the film, we had a premiere last night, that it sort of helped them remember these events and to see them in a fresh way. And the people, for me as a filmmaker, what's important is that people feel that I've been faithful to what their experience. And so we were gratified that the subjects in our film felt that the film did justice to their experience and to the cause for which they fought. And that's, for me, the highest compliment, because we try very hard to be faithful to that and to try to communicate that to other people. And I think, for me, what happened here has been very inspiring because people really willing to give up their own personal safety for something, for a greater idea. And when people unite in a collective effort, I think it can be ennobling.
Yeah, and I'm very grateful for comments that we're getting from the Western audience, English-speaking audience in America, both in Washington and Santa Barbara, where we showed at the film festival. The one comment that is most frequently heard is people come up and say, "Wow, I had no idea. I really learned something from this. I just didn't know." And that's great. That's great. And on a personal level, I'm just very thankful to Mark and to Ollis for having done that job. And I keep saying this, and Mark is tired of hearing this. One of the greatest satisfactions of being involved in this picture was watching Mark and Ollis work together. These are two grandmasters, great directors. Mark doesn't speak Ukrainian. Ollis's English is not perfect. But yet they understood each other through the art. Instantly. And for me, it was such a joy to see that. And also, I really need to take my hat off to Jason, who was kind of sitting between them and listening. And he also doesn't understand Ukrainian at all. And the visual, he got it. The team worked magnificently, and I think they made a really, really wonderful, brilliant film that really tells the story of Maidan and Ukraine in a way that a human way that people of any language can understand.
And the continuing struggle to create a more democratic, more equitable country.
Thank you for your job, and thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting us here. A privilege to be able to speak to you.
Thank you very much. І отже, з вами був вечірній тепловізор. В студії був Олександр Данилюк. І до наступних зустрічей. Ми щовечора несемо тепло в ваші оселі. До побачення.